Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works, and it is part 6 of the Racer's Wedge. Let's get the box out of the way. We are at the infamous clutter zone, and it's getting quite cluttered. I think I'm going to have to use some plastic explosives here and get that cleared away. So, if you've been following along, you know that what we have here is the original MPC frame from their Sunrunner kit, Econoline. And I did not have any of the suspension parts, or the engine for that matter, so what I did is I copied the suspension parts from AMT's Econoline kit from their Vantum. So this axle actually came from Monogram Super Duty kit. The last axle here, the suspension is a scratch-built air ride tag axle, and the cross member itself came from a 1940s pickup truck. It's the front axle. And the engine, this guy right here, this engine, once again, is copied from the AMT Econoline engine, with all the parts being cast out of resin by me. Let's put this guy on its wheels. So the first big project we want to achieve here, I think, is I'm going to extend the frame to the length that it needs to be for the Racer's Wedge. Because, as you can see, it needs to come back here quite a bit farther if I line this up with the back wheels. So we need to extend that. And I've got a fuel tank to install, and that's already been cast. It's laying around here somewhere. There we go. There is the fuel tank. That'll have to be mounted. Once I get it extended, then I'm going to concentrate on getting the engine in place and the drive shaft, and then we'll get this all painted up, and then we can start going back to body work for the top side. That was a mouthful. Let's get going. Now I've got the wedge body just sitting on its side, but it's basically lined up to where it needs to be on the model here. And if I look at this multifunction ruler here, as you can see, I'm going to need almost 3 inches of extension on the frame here. So that's what we have to work with. I'm not going to take it all the way back to the actual body, because the body's going to have some strength to it as well. But I think we need to go back pretty much the full 3 inches. So this is my initial extension of the frame. And the frame rails are nothing fancy. All I did was just laminate 3 strips of plastic together. I didn't have anything on hand that was that thick. And I didn't feel like going out and buying anything right now. Now, of course, I'm probably going to put in another 2 transverse members. And I think I might put a diagonal in. I mean, if I was doing this on a real vehicle, I probably would put a diagonal in there. I know it's going to have a body put on it, but I mean, this is such a long extension, I could see them wanting to do that. And I'm still going to be putting the fuel tank in here. Because really, if you were building this vehicle, you wouldn't want any more weight behind this point than possible. I mean, as it is, standard procedure would probably be to always make sure that your engine is as far forward as possible and you have as little weight back here as possible. So, in case you're wondering if, wow, that's awfully long, by the time we put the cab on here, and I still have to do a little bit of shimming. And one thing I did is this piece here, I cut a couple notches in there in order to clear the frame. Still had to do a little bit of height adjustment, but if we plop this on here, you can see that finally it is sitting on there, 99% correct without having to put a paint bottle or something underneath it. So You can see it's not like that ginormous frame is sticking out or anything like that. And there's my cross members and my diagonal that they would be using to give it a little more rigidity. I'm not sure if it's been deliberate, but I've been reluctant to get my engine in place. And really, I need to get it in so I can get my drive shaft in place and I can finally get the chassis painted. So the engine mounts, and that's not something that's there in the AMT kit. The AMT kit just basically kind of has a thing down here on the K member for the engine just to drop onto, whereas MPC gives you these engine bearers. Well, this one needed to come out just a smidge, and this one, you can see that I've had to basically file a little bit of a relief in here, and that's so that the exhaust manifold can clear. Now, turning to this piece here, which is in fact the transmission cross member, I've put this little piece in here just so that basically the tail piece of the transmission can sit in there. Now, both kits have the engine offset, to the right, but I guess probably about 4 or 5 scale inches. So I figure if both kits did it, that's probably the way it was on the real thing. I've super glued the fuel tank onto this piece of 1000 styrene, which is then going to basically drop into this space right here. And we're only ever going to see this from the underside, so I don't see that as being a big deal. And I think that should look fine. Finally, our engine is glued in place, and our fuel tank is in place. I'm currently working on the drive shaft, and you can see that right there. What I've done is I've used a thicker piece of styrene tube, and then I've put some smaller pieces in the end of it, and I'm going to try to represent the U-joints at the end of the now. Continuing to work on our drive shaft, you can see this end of the drive shaft I've put just basically some small bits of styrene with one end rounded on, and I've alternated the way they are, and that represents the bits that are going to grab the actual U-joint. Now if we go to the other end, this end is basically done. I've gone and added just some stubs that go through to create the U-joint right there. And I think that's all we really need to do once I get the other ones on here. More progress. The drive shaft has been installed. And see how that goes in. And certainly we don't need that long a drive shaft. Certainly we won't need a 2-piece drive shaft, because distance from the engine to that first axle is actually fairly shorter than it was in the original van. Started building the exhausts. These are just a couple of pieces of bent plastic rod, basically super glued to the ends of the exhaust manifolds. And I'm not going to aim for anything fancy here. I'm just basically going to put a muffler on each of these, and then there's going to be a short tailpipe coming out to the sides. Why make it more complicated than you have to? They've got lots of space under this vehicle. There's really no reason to run it all the way to the very back. If anything, there would be a tendency to say, okay, let's get the muffler on, let's have a short tailpipe, which is coming out a few feet behind the cab, and then that way they wouldn't be losing a lot of horsepower to the exhaust system. I mean, they're not going to drag racing in this, but on the other hand, you know, they want as much power as possible. Okay, so now we've got a tailpipe and a muffler on each of our exhausts here. Like I said, this just was the easiest way to do it. I could have mucked around and combined the pipes and everything like that, but I'm wondering if our heroes would have really bothered to do that. So the mufflers are just chunks of thick styrene rounded off with some end caps on there. And as you can see here, I've hollowed out the ends of the tailpipes. And there's really not much point in running the tailpipe all the way to the back of the vehicle because you're just going to lose power. And besides which, I think they would want to have as little weight past these rear wheels as possible. So, I think we are finally ready to do some painting on our chassis. As well, you can see there's some little hangers coming down to hold the exhaust, or the mufflers rather. I'm in the process of painting our chassis now. And I've painted all of the actual framework of the chassis semi-gloss black with the exception of right here. And I'm going to touch that up later. Why? Because I got to grab it somewhere. And I know the wheels look pretty messy, but basically I'm painting them a Tamiya blue, and it's from a spray can, so I'm just kind of putting a little bit in a lid, and then I've been painting it on. And since it's the first color that goes on, I don't have to be neat. But they've basically had 3 coats. They've basically had 2 coats. Hopefully 3 coats will get them looking nice and solid. And then I'll start being careful as I paint the hubcap silver and the wheels themselves German gray. Now if we look at the backside, you can see I've kind of slopped some flat black on the backside of the wheels. Now these are completely devoid of any sort of detail, so I want those to be flat black just to kind of hide that fact. The fuel tank has been painted steel, as has the exhausts. I'm going to give them a little bit of rust later on. And my shock absorbers have been painted yellow for Monroe. Okay, hopefully this makes people feel a little bit better about the wheels than that last shot did. As you can see, they've had a couple of coats of blue. I've painted the hubcaps silver, and they look like fairly standard Ford dog dish hubcaps. And if we flip it over, I still have this area of the frame I've got to paint. I got some touching up to do on the transmission pan, and depending on how I turn this, you can see that the airbags have been painted. It's coming together. At least it looks like a truck frame now and not a bunch of weird colored plastic. So there is our chassis all painted up. Got a little bit of rust on the exhaust pipes, and same thing on the top side. And we've got the shock absorbers painted yellow. The engine looks like it's happy living where it is. I've already done some test fitting, and I'm pretty sure that everything is going to fit with the doghouse cover in place. But really, until I glue this in place and set the cab down, I won't know for sure. So I better get this glued in place. I needed to put a little bit of filler here and there, just because for some reason or other I had cut away part of the floor here at some point in time in the distant past, and I just wasn't happy with the little bit of a gap there was there. So I'm going to give the inside of this and the floor a coat of neutral gray. When I do paint the body color, I'm going to shoot this and this with the body color, as well as this. More test fitting. The underside has been painted in neutral gray. I tend to like to paint the undersides of my vehicles neutral gray. As I said earlier, this will be shot with body color here, so I'll end up with some overspray, as well as the engine compartment. We're going to want that to be body color as well. Alright, some more test fitting. The cab is just sitting on the chassis, and as you can see, the engine sits inside the doghouse nicely. And the body's looking good. It's going to have to come up a bit at the front, but otherwise, now It's 4:30 in the morning. Obviously, I'm not working this week. But we are supposed to be taking a road trip tomorrow, so I probably should knock off and put this thing together so I can post it. So, thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep on modeling.